That's what she said to me. On the morning of my own birthday. My sister standing in my kitchen, wagging her finger like I was some maid she barely paid, while the calendar on the wall silently mocked me with today's date circled in bright red ink. My birthday. But of course she didn't care. He never did. What would you do if your own family forgot you for decades, but demanded you serve them again? Don't look away, this story will pull you in from the first second to the very last. Kept my face calm. I didn't flinch. I didn't remind her what day it was. I just sipped my lukewarm coffee, the bitter taste cutting into my tongue, and let her voice echo around the room. Because unlike her, I wasn't careless with details. And unlike her, I had a secret already tucked away. Something she didn't know. Something she couldn't imagine. The kitchen smelled faintly of burnt toast because she'd left the bread in the toaster and walked away, too busy yelling at me to notice. The smoke curled lazily toward the ceiling, but she didn't stop barking orders. Make sure the chairs are covered in ivory, not white. There's a difference, and if you can't tell, then maybe you shouldn't be trusted with this at all. Her voice had that sharp edge, the one she always used to remind me she was in charge. She held the list like a weapon, waving it in the air with each word. I glanced at the clock above the sink. 8:14 a.m. My phone buzzed on the counter with a notification. A quiet reminder of the one person who had remembered my birthday. A message from an old friend wishing me a beautiful day. A single line, but it warmed me more than any of her grand speeches ever had. I didn't answer. I just let the glow of it sink into my bones, a small ember of validation she couldn't touch. You'll have to pick up the flowers by noon, she continued, pacing across the linoleum floor. Her heels clicked like she thought she was walking a stage. Don't be late this time. Last year you nearly ruined everything. Last year. I remembered last year. Standing in the corner of her ballroom, watching her bask in compliments while I slipped out the back door before dessert was served. Nobody noticed my absence. Nobody cared. Not one of them even remembered that the day before had been my birthday. Or maybe they knew and didn't bother. Both possibilities hurt. But this year I promised myself the story would be different. She leaned across the counter, narrowing her eyes. You're writing this down, right? I smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes. I tapped the little notepad sitting beside me, though the page was nearly blank. She didn't notice. She never noticed when it came to me. I've got it, I said softly, my voice calm, steady, almost soothing. Like a nurse talking to a restless patient. She mistook that calm for obedience. That was her first mistake. The back door rattled as the wind pushed against it. Outside, the sky was gray, heavy with the smell of rain. Storm was coming. I could feel it in my joints, the way the air pressed against my skin. He didn't care. She never looked outside unless there was a mirror waiting for her reflection. Don't forget the photographer, she said, dropping another sheet of paper onto the counter. I already told everyone it's going to be the event of the season. I let her words hang there, her arrogance filling the space like a bad perfume. The event of the season. That was what she cared about. Not family, not memories, not love. Just spectacle. Just applause. The toaster finally popped, sending 2 charred slices into the air. She grimaced, waving the smoke away with her list, then shoved the burnt toast into my hands. Eat this if you're hungry. I don't have time to babysit your meals. I looked at the blackened bread in my palms. For a moment I thought about throwing it into the trash, making a point. But then I simply set it back on the counter. I wasn't going to waste energy on crumbs when I had a storm of my own building inside me. At that moment the phone rang. The old landline hanging on the wall. It was my mother. I knew before my sister even picked it up. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice suddenly sweet, dripping with sugar. The way she transformed in an instant made my stomach turn. "Yes, everything's under control. She's handling it. Don't worry." She. That's all I was. Not a name. Not a person. Just the one who handled things. I turned away, staring at the condensation gathering on the window pane. My reflection stared back at me, older, tired, but not broken. Not yet. She hung up and turned back to me, her face slipping right back into that sharp mask. "Don't disappoint me. You've ruined enough already." Ruined enough. That phrase echoed in my ears. My chest tightened, but I swallowed hard, forcing my heartbeat to steady. "Of course," I murmured, almost under my breath. But inside I wasn't agreeing. I was making a promise to myself. Never again. The clock ticked toward 9. She gathered her coat, slung her purse over her shoulder and brushed past me with a final glare. The smell of her perfume lingered in the air, strong, artificial, suffocating. As the door closed behind her, the silence felt alive. Heavy-charged. The kind of silence that follows thunder before the lightning strikes. I let out a slow breath. My hands rested on the counter, fingertips pressing into the cool surface. And in that silence, the corners of my mouth lifted ever so slightly. Because while she believed she had handed me another list of chores, what she really handed me was an opportunity. And she didn't even know it. When she came back hours later, I was ready. I had the notepad in my hands, pretending to review details. The paper was still mostly blank, but I held it with confidence. She dropped her keys on the table and narrowed her eyes. Well, did you get everything sorted, or do I have to check your work like you're a child? I lifted my gaze, meeting hers directly. For once, I didn't look away. And in that moment, with the storm still brewing outside and the house heavy with unspoken words, I knew she saw something different in my eyes. Something she hadn't seen before. You'll see soon enough, I thought, though I didn't say it aloud. Because this wasn't the moment for explanations. This was the moment before the blade dropped. The pause that makes the cut even deeper when it finally comes. And as she stared at me, waiting for me to flinch, I simply smiled. The kind of smile that says, I know something you don't. And I did. Her eyes locked on mine, sharp, expectant, waiting for me to falter. But I didn't. I held her stare, my smile small and steady, until the corners of her mouth twitched with impatience. She finally sighed, muttering something under her breath about dead weight, and tossed her coat over the chair. I knew then, in that exact second, she would never see me as anything but her servant. Not her sister. Not her equal. Just the one who carried her burdens so she could keep her crown polished. And I knew something else too. She had no idea that crown was already slipping. That night, while she bragged to her friends on the phone, I sat at the kitchen table with my notepad open. The lamp buzzed faintly, casting a dull yellow glow across the paper. I doodled meaningless lines, pretending to jot down tasks, while listening to her laughter spill from the other room. She listed everything to her friends as if she had planned it herself. The hall, the flowers, the decorations, the music. Each word made my pen press harder against the paper until the tip nearly tore through. I could have walked in and confronted her. I could have shouted, reminded her she hadn't remembered my birthday in 26 years. But I didn't. Because words fade. People forget arguments. But humiliation, that lasts forever. The next morning, I drove to the hall she had chosen. The parking lot was nearly empty, only a few workers moving supplies inside. I stepped out of the car and let the wind whip my hair around my face. Inside, the place smelled like paint and sawdust. Workers carried ladders, checking lights overhead, their boots clanging against the wooden floor. "Ma'am, you here for a booking?" one of them asked. I smiled politely. Just confirming details. But in truth, I hadn't signed a single contract. There was no catering order. No band. No florist on call. All she had were my words, and my words were nothing more than smoke. I walked through the echoing hall, my heels clicking against the floor. I imagined it filled with people. Guests in polished shoes and sparkling dresses, murmuring in anticipation. I pictured them sitting at empty tables, waiting for food that never came, glancing at a stage with no music. I could almost hear the whispers, the awkward laughter, the embarrassment bleeding into the air. And it thrilled me. By the end of the week, she was unbearable. Every time I saw her, she had a new demand. "Did you order the wine? It has to be the brand I like. Double-check the guest list. Last time you messed up. Don't embarrass me in front of everyone again." Always again. As if every shortcoming in her life had my fingerprints on it. I learned to nod at the right moments, to murmur of course, and don't worry, just enough to calm her down. She thought she was in control. She thought I was her shadow, trailing behind her, fixing her mistakes. But the truth was, every promise I made was another knot in the rope tightening around her neck. One evening, she barged into my living room while I was knitting on the sofa. "Don't forget the flowers," she said, dropping a glossy magazine onto my lap. A page was folded, showing pale ivory roses arranged in tall vases. Exactly like this. No substitutions. I traced the picture with my finger, studying the delicate petals. "Ivory," I repeated softly. "Yes, ivory," she snapped, already halfway back to the door. You always get things wrong if I don't spell them out. Her heels clattered down the hallway before I could answer. I sat there staring at the photograph, my knitting needles resting in my lap. I thought about how fragile flowers really are. How quickly they wilt, how easily they're forgotten once the night is over. Just like birthdays. Just like mine. The following Sunday our mother invited us both over for dinner. The table smelled of roast chicken and herbs, but the atmosphere was heavy. "So," my mother asked brightly, "everything's ready for the big day?" My sister leaned back in her chair, smirking. "Of course. She's handling it." She jerked her thumb in my direction like I was a hired hand, not her sister. I stabbed my fork into a potato, keeping my voice neutral. "Everything's under control." "That's what I like to hear," my mother said, clearly relieved. But I caught the flicker of doubt in her eyes when she looked at me. A tiny crease between her brows, as if she wanted to ask more but didn't dare. I almost smiled. Because yes, everything was under control. Just not the way they thought. As the days drew closer, she grew more restless. She called me every morning, sometimes twice a day. "Confirm the seating. Call the decorator. Make sure the invitations went out." She never once said thank you. Never once paused to consider what it cost me. Time, money, energy. To her it wasn't effort. It was obligation. And each time her voice screeched through the phone, I imagined the moment her perfect mask would crack. The moment she'd stand in a room filled with people, her lies crumbling in front of them. I wanted to see her break. The night before the event, I sat alone at my kitchen table, sipping tea while the rain tapped against the window. My notepad was still blank. 26 years of forgotten birthdays weighed heavy in my chest, but instead of pain I felt clarity. This wasn't about one night. It wasn't about revenge for a single slight. This was about years of silence, years of invisibility, years of being treated like furniture in my own family. Tomorrow they would all see me. Not because I stood in the spotlight, but because I would pull it out from under her feet. The morning of the event, she burst through my front door, flustered and radiant in a silk robe. Her hair was half-curled, makeup halfway done, but she still managed to bark orders. "Don't be late to the hall," she warned. "And for God's sake, make sure the food is hot when it gets there. Last time you ruined everything." Her words dripped with venom, but I only nodded. "I'll take care of it," I whispered. She didn't notice the calm in my voice. She didn't see the way my hands didn't shake anymore. Because she thought she had everything. But she had nothing. By noon I drove past the hall one last time. Workers were gone. The place stood ready but empty. Tables bare, stage silent, air still. A hollow shell waiting to swallow her pride whole. I stood outside my car for a moment, breathing in the cool air. The smell of rain lingered, fresh and sharp. I pictured the guests arriving, their heels clicking on the floor, their laughter fading as they looked around in confusion. I pictured the whispers starting, then spreading like wildfire. And then I pictured her. Standing there waiting for me to save her. Waiting for me to fix what had never even been built. The thought sent a shiver of satisfaction through me. When I got home I laid my phone on the counter. It buzzed with her messages, reminders, demands, warnings. I let them pile up unread. Instead I brewed another cup of tea, sat by the window, and let the storm outside mirror the storm I had prepared for her. Because tonight she wouldn't just face a failed party. She would face the truth she had buried for 26 years. And I would be nowhere near to help her pick up the pieces. I set my teacup down on the windowsill and listened to the storm roll outside. The wind rattled the panes, rain tapping like impatient fingers against the glass. My phone vibrated again, buzzing against the counter, but I didn't move to answer. She could wait. For the first time in years I was in no rush. By the time evening fell, the world outside was washed clean. The storm had moved on, leaving the streets glistening under yellow streetlights. I imagined the cars pulling up to the hall, tires crunching over wet pavement, women adjusting their gowns, men straightening ties. Each one stepping out with expectations high. And I imagined the silence that would greet them. The empty tables. The hollow stage. The look on their faces when they realized nothing had been prepared. I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the refrigerator filling the room, and smiled. The night was beginning. Around 7 my neighbor knocked on the door. Mrs. Carter, an older woman with sharp eyes and a kind heart. She held a small plate wrapped in foil. "I baked too much cobbler," she said with a gentle smile. "Thought you might like some." The smell of cinnamon and sugar drifted into my kitchen as I unwrapped the foil. Warm steam rose and for a moment my chest tightened. No one in my family had baked me anything in decades, but here she was, offering kindness without expectation. "Thank you," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She tilted her head, studying me. "Big night for your sister, isn't it? You not going?" I forced a light laugh. "I'm sitting this one out." Her brows lifted slightly, but she didn't press. She just patted my arm and left me with the cobbler. I set the plate on the counter, the sweetness filling the room. A small, unexpected gift on a night meant to be bitter. Meanwhile, across town the hall was filling. I could almost see it. Women slipping off their coats, heels clicking on the polished floor, men shaking hands. The sound of polite chatter floating through the cavernous space. But then, the pause. The tilt of heads. The confused glances toward the stage. Empty tables without flowers. Platters missing from their places. A stage with no instruments, no microphone. I closed my eyes and let the imagined silence wash over me. Not the peaceful kind, but the sharp, uncomfortable silence that cuts through polite conversation and turns it sour. At 7:30 my phone rang again. Her name lit up the screen. I let it ring. At 7:32 another call. Then another. Each one more frantic. By the fourth she switched to voicemail. Her voice cracked, low and harsh. "Where are you? The food isn't here. The guests are waiting. Fix this. Now." I didn't move. Another voicemail followed. This time higher pitched, nearly shrieking. "Don't you dare do this to me. Everyone's staring. I look like a fool. Answer me." My pulse quickened, but not with fear. With something else, satisfaction. For the first time in decades she needed me more than I ever needed her. By 8 the tone of her messages changed. The confidence was gone. Panic bled through her words. "They're asking questions. People are leaving. Where are the musicians? Did you forget? Please, please fix this. Please." That word caught my ear. He had never said it to me before. Not once in 26 years. And now, with her world unraveling, it slipped out like a final thread snapping loose. I pressed my hand against my chest, steadying my breath. The satisfaction was almost too much to hold. I imagined her then, standing at the front of the room in her glittering dress, scanning the crowd for me. Her cheeks flushed, her smile trembling, trying to cover her panic. Whispering excuses to guests while darting glances toward the doors, waiting for me to walk in and save her. But I didn't. I stayed in my quiet house, the clock ticking steadily, each second hammering her further into humiliation. At 8:15 another knock came at my door. This time it was the mailman, dropping off a small package I had ordered weeks ago. A pair of gardening gloves. Nothing special. But as I signed for the box I thought about the contrast. My life. Simple, quiet, overlooked. And hers. Loud, demanding, desperate for attention. The gloves sat unopened on the counter as I returned to my chair. The cobbler cooled beside me, untouched, though the sweet smell lingered. My hunger had shifted. I was feeding on something else now. The voicemails grew longer. She begged. She threatened. She cursed. One message ended with her sobbing, the sound muffled as though she turned away from the crowd, trying to hide her breakdown. Another came from my mother's number. Her voice was tight, clipped with anger. "What have you done? Fix this. Now." I almost laughed. What have I done? Nothing. That was the beauty of it. I had done nothing at all. And that nothing was destroying her. By 9 the silence on my phone was deafening. No more calls. No more voicemails. Just emptiness. And I knew what that meant. Guests had started to leave. Their judgment hung in the air long after their footsteps faded from the hall. Whispers would trail behind them into the night, spreading through neighborhoods and workplaces. Her event of the season had become the embarrassment of the year. I pictured her alone, mascara smudged, clutching her phone with shaking hands. Her throne had collapsed and she had no one left to blame but me. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. Instead, I sat with the silence, letting it stretch, letting it sink deep into my bones. Because this wasn't about gloating. This was about balance. For 26 years I had been invisible. Tonight she was. At 9:30 I finally cut myself a small slice of cobbler. The crust flaked under my fork, the filling still warm in the center. I took a bite and closed my eyes, savoring the sweetness. It was the first real birthday cake I'd had in years. And it wasn't even meant for me. By 10, the rain started again, tapping lightly against the window. I stood there watching, the reflection of the streetlight shimmering in the puddles outside. My phone buzzed one last time, a text from her. "You ruined me." 2 words. That was all. No begging. No threats. Just a confession. I set the phone down without replying. But she was wrong. I hadn't ruined her. She had ruined herself. I had simply stepped out of the way and let her fall. Her words still glowed on the screen. "You ruined me." I didn't delete the message. I didn't even reply. I just let it sit there, a tiny square of light in the darkened room. It reminded me of a flickering candle about to burn out, struggling for oxygen. For years, I had been the one gasping for air under her shadow. Now it was her turn. The rain tapped harder against the window, the rhythm steady, almost like applause. I wrapped my arms around myself and sank into the chair, phone still resting on the table, buzzing now and then with fresh notifications. Calls. Messages. All ignored. At 10:15, my mother's number flashed across the screen again. This time she didn't leave a voicemail. She sent a text. "Pick up this instant. Do you have any idea what you've done?" I stared at it, my throat tightening. Even now she wasn't asking what I wanted. She wasn't asking if I was okay. It was still about appearances. About the family name. About her golden child's crown slipping off in front of everyone. My fingers hovered over the screen. For a moment I considered replying. A single word. No. But instead I pressed the phone face down and walked into the kitchen. The cobbler still sat on the counter, half-eaten, its sweet aroma filling the space. I cut another slice and slid it onto a plate. This time I sat at the table instead of the chair. For once I ate like it was my own celebration, not scraps left behind from someone else's feast. Each bite was soft, comforting, laced with cinnamon and warmth. I imagined the opposite scene across town. Plates scraped empty, not with food but with disappointment. Guests whispering on their way out, laughter sharp and mocking as they slid into their cars. One table overflowing with sweetness. Another stripped bare. By 10:30 the calls slowed. The house grew quieter, though the storm outside swelled, rattling the gutters and sweeping branches across the street. I left the lights off, letting the room glow only from the occasional flash of lightning. In that half-light the phone lit up again. Her name this time, not my mother's. My sister's. The vibration shook against the wood, longer, harsher, as if sheer persistence could drag me into answering. I didn't touch it. When the call ended, a message appeared almost instantly. "How could you do this to me? I trusted you." I laughed out loud, the sound foreign in my quiet kitchen. Trusted me? She had never trusted me with anything but chores, errands, responsibilities no one else wanted. Trusted me the way someone trusts a doormat to catch the dirt from their shoes. Another message followed, angrier. "You think you've won? You've made me look like a fool, but this isn't over. Answer me." I traced the rim of my teacup with my finger, calm, steady. She didn't realize it yet, but it was already over. The night had spoken louder than any words I could ever say. At 11 o'clock, my neighbor's porch light flicked on across the street. Mrs. Carter stepped outside with her dog, the small terrier pulling against the leash, eager for its late-night walk. I watched them from the window, the dog's tiny paws splashing in puddles, her silhouette steady under an umbrella. Life continued quietly without theatrics or thrones. I wondered if she knew what kind of storm was unfolding just miles away. Probably not. To her, tonight was just another wet Thursday. And maybe that was the sharpest truth of all. While my sister's world collapsed, the rest of the world moved on unaffected. At 11:15 my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't her or my mother. It was an old acquaintance. One of my sister's friends, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. The text was short. "Is everything okay? We're all so confused." I stared at the words for a long time. We're all so confused. For once I wasn't. I typed out a reply, my fingers moving slowly, deliberately. "I'm fine. Thank you for asking." Then I set the phone aside again. It was the first time all evening someone had asked about me. Not the party. Not the food. Not the image. Me. And it wasn't my family. By midnight the calls stopped completely. My phone lay silent, dark, lifeless, as though it too had given up. I stood and walked through the house, each room dim and still. The living room with its sagging couch. The hallway lined with family photos. My face always smaller, pushed to the edges, blurred in the background while hers shone in the center. I paused at one frame, a picture of her birthday years ago. Balloons everywhere, a cake taller than my arm, her in a sparkling dress surrounded by laughing guests. I was in the corner, carrying plates half hidden behind someone's shoulder. I lifted the frame down and traced the glass with my thumb. So much of my life had been lived on the edges of her spotlight. But not tonight. Tonight she was the shadow. I returned to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My throat felt dry, though not from nerves anymore. From release. From the strange relief of silence. Outside, the rain softened to a drizzle, the kind that whispered against the street instead of pounding it. I cracked the window open and let the cool air drift in, carrying the smell of wet earth. For the first time in years I felt light. Not happy, no, not yet. But lighter. At 12:30, just as I was about to turn in, the phone lit up once more. A final attempt. My sister again. No call this time. Just a single message. You'll regret this. I stared at the words until the screen went dark. Maybe I would. Maybe I wouldn't. But for the first time I realized the truth. Regret was hers to carry, not mine. I turned the phone face down, slid the window closed, and blew out the small candle I had lit earlier. The house fell into darkness, quiet except for the fading rain. And in that silence I smiled. The phone lay face down on the table, its glow finally dimmed, like a stage light turned off after the play has ended. The night was still, the rain now a soft mist outside. My chest rose and fell slowly, steadily, as though my body had been holding its breath for years and was only now learning how to exhale. But I wasn't finished. Silence was not just peace, it was power. And I had chosen it carefully, not out of weakness but as the sharpest blade I could wield. At dawn, a faint gray light crept through the curtains. I hadn't slept, but I didn't feel tired. I felt alive, as though my veins had been flushed clean of years of resentment. I poured myself a cup of coffee, black and bitter, and stood by the window watching the world wake. Across town I imagined her. My sister. Wide-eyed, frantic, replaying the disaster in her mind. The guests walking out, the whispers spreading like wildfire, the calls she had made to me, calls I had never answered. I wondered if she had slept at all. I doubted it. Queens do not sleep easily when their throne has collapsed. By mid-morning, the world outside hummed with its usual rhythm. Cars passed, neighbors carried groceries, the mail truck rattled down the street. Ordinary life. Yet in my phone, the extraordinary fallout unfolded silently, message by message. A flood of texts from acquaintances, distant relatives, even people who hadn't spoken to me in years. Some curious, some gloating, some simply stunned. And buried among them, my mother's last attempt. You humiliated this family. Don't expect forgiveness. I read it once, then again, and then, calmly, I deleted it. Forgiveness. That was a word she had never offered me. Why should I crave it now? It was noon when the knock came. A sharp, impatient rap against my door. I knew even before I opened it who it would be. And there she was. Her hair unkempt, her eyes swollen from crying, makeup smudged in streaks down her cheeks. She didn't look like the queen she had always pretended to be. She looked human. Small. Frightened. You, she spat, voice breaking. You did this to me. I didn't flinch. I leaned against the doorframe, coffee still in hand. Did what, exactly? Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone, shoving it toward me. On the screen were photos from last night. Tables bare, guests leaving, faces twisted in confusion. And then worse, screenshots. Messages leaked. Her name dragged across social media, her reputation unraveling thread by thread. Why? She choked out. Why would you destroy me like this? I let the silence stretch, heavy between us. The kind of silence that forces a person to hear their own heartbeat. Finally I spoke. Softly, but each word sharp as glass. Because you destroyed me long before tonight. You just never noticed. Her mouth opened, then closed as though the words lodged in her throat. You ordered me around like I was nothing, I continued. On my own birthday you made me a servant in my own home. And for years before that, you took and never once thought what it cost me. But I remembered. I remembered everything. She shook her head wildly. This isn't justice, this is cruelty. You'll regret it when they all turn on you. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. They won't turn on me. Because I never promised them a kingdom I couldn't keep. I never built my life on illusions. You did. And now the curtain's fallen. Her breathing quickened, shallow and ragged. For a moment I almost pitied her. Almost. Then I remembered every night I had cried quietly so she wouldn't hear. Every birthday I spent cleaning while she celebrated. Every look of dismissal from my own mother when I begged to be seen. Pity dissolved like sugar in black coffee. You think silence is power? She whispered bitterly. I leaned in, close enough for her to see the calm in my eyes. No. Silence is justice. Because it leaves you alone with your own guilt. And that's louder than anything I could ever say. She staggered back as if the words themselves had struck her. Her phone slipped from her hand, clattering against the floor. She didn't pick it up. For the first time, my sister looked like someone who had lost not just a party, not just her pride but herself. She left without another word, her steps uneven on the porch, her figure shrinking as she disappeared down the path. I didn't call after her. I didn't slam the door. I simply closed it gently and locked it behind me. Inside the air felt different. Lighter. My home was quiet again, but no longer with the heavy, suffocating quiet of loneliness. It was the quiet of freedom. The rest of the day unfolded slowly, deliberately. I cleaned the kitchen, washed the single plate I had used, folded the blanket on the couch. Small, ordinary tasks. Yet each one felt like a reclamation, proof that my life now belonged wholly to me. In the evening I lit another candle. Not out of necessity but choice. The flame danced gently, steady and controlled. A reminder of how silence burns, not with chaos but with endurance. Later that night I sat at the table with pen and paper. Old-fashioned, deliberate. I began writing, not to her, not to my mother but to myself. A letter of acknowledgement. I wrote down every slight I had endured. Every humiliation. Every moment I had swallowed my pride to keep the peace. And then at the bottom I wrote, justice served. In silence. I folded the paper and tucked it into a drawer, not to revisit but to rest. The way one rests flowers on a grave. Because that's what it was, the burial of the old me. The woman who had lived in the shadows of others. By midnight the storm had long passed. The moon shone bright, casting pale light across the kitchen. My phone sat on the table, silent, untouched. I didn't need to check it. I knew there would be more messages, more attempts, more desperate grabs for the power she had lost. But none of it mattered anymore. Because true justice doesn't come from shouting or fighting or proving a point. It comes from standing still while the world realizes the truth on its own. And last night the world had seen her truth. I took a final sip of my tea, warm and soothing, and carried the empty cup to the sink. My reflection in the window caught my eye, tired, older but strong. Stronger than I had ever seen myself before. I didn't smile this time. I didn't need to. The silence itself was enough. As I turned off the light and let the house settle into darkness, one thought lingered, steady and certain. Justice had been served. And I hadn't needed to say a single word. If this story struck your heart, don't leave in silence. Subscribe now and join me for more dark, emotional journeys of betrayal, revenge, and the strength women find when no one expects it.